He was supposed to fly with dignity. Instead, he was told to squeeze into seat 32B. At 85 years old, Colonel Jim Wallace, a Medal of Honor recipient, stood quietly at gate C-12, holding a first-class ticket that had been booked months in advance by his granddaughter. He was on his way to Washington, D.C. to attend a White House ceremony honoring military heroes, an invitation that symbolized a lifetime of service and sacrifice. But as he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, the tone shifted. "We've had an aircraft change," the agent said, barely meeting his eyes. "You've been reassigned to a middle seat in the back 32B. Confused, Jim pointed to his confirmed seat 2A first class. He calmly explained that due to age and back injuries from combat, this seat had been chosen specifically to ensure comfort. The response, a cold explanation about policies and elite frequent flyer status taking precedence. No apology, no effort to help. The same hands that once pulled wounded soldiers from the line of fire were now holding a flimsy boarding pass, a symbol of how easily respect can be downgraded. Jim stepped aside without protest, but with a heaviness that had nothing to do with the flight itself. This wasn't about comfort, it was about being seen. And in that moment, he felt invisible. Colonel Jim Wallace had experienced many things in his life: combat zones, the weight of command, the quiet sorrow of folded flags handed to grieving families. But he never expected to feel so dismissed in a place as ordinary as a boarding gate. After being told he had been downgraded from his carefully booked first-class seat to 32B, a cramped middle seat in the rear of the plane, Jim approached the podium again. His voice was calm, controlled, but edged with concern. He wasn't asking for special treatment, just to keep the seat his granddaughter had thoughtfully reserved, considering his back injuries from the Vietnam War. The gate agent, a woman named Brenda, barely glanced at him as she explained in practiced corporate language that due to the equipment change, there were fewer first-class seats available. Those remaining seats had been reallocated to Diamond Elite passengers. Brenda's voice was professional but icy, her eyes fixed not on Jim, but on the monitor in front of her. When Jim gently pointed out that he was traveling for an official White House event honoring Medal of Honor recipients, and that his ticket had been confirmed months ago, she repeated airline policy word for word, as if reading from a manual. "Our seating prioritization is based on fare class and loyalty tier," she said. "Your ticket was booked using airline partner miles, which unfortunately places you lower on the upgrade list." Jim mentioned that his booking included a flag noting his Medal of Honor status, something required under TSA pre-check and military protocol. Brenda paused, blinked, then replied coolly, "Many of our passengers have served honorably. That's not how we prioritize seats." He stood there for a moment, holding the new boarding pass 32B, printed in bold black ink like a scar across the paper. There were no more explanations, no offers to help, no interest in resolving this situation with even a trace of humanity. The younger agent Mark stood awkwardly beside her, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. The moment hung in the air, one decorated veteran, one policy-driven system, and the quiet erosion of basic respect. Jim didn't yell. He didn't argue. Instead, he took the boarding pass, nodded politely, and found a chair in the waiting area. The sting wasn't just about being moved to a worse seat. It was the casual dismissal of everything he represented, not just as a war hero, but as a man, a grandfather, a human being. His granddaughter had saved up for months to give him one comfortable, dignified flight to Washington. And now, because of a seat map and a status code, that dignity was quietly erased. As he sat near the window watching other passengers shuffle through the boarding processes, the intercom announced first-class boarding. He looked down at the new boarding pass, then back up at the gate. Brenda didn't look his way. She had already moved on to the next customer. Jim felt tired not just in his bones, but in his spirit. What had changed in the world? He wondered when a Medal of Honor no longer earned a second look, not even a conversation. He didn't want special treatment. He only wanted what had been fairly reserved. But the gate agents had chosen policy over people, rules over respect. And that, more than the middle seat, was what truly hurt. As Colonel Jim Wallace sat quietly at gate C-12, the noise of the terminal faded into a dull hum. He gripped the armrest of his chair, the thin boarding pass for seat 32B still in his lap. The disappointment had settled into a deep ache, not just in his back, but in his spirit. The downgrade from first class to a cramped middle seat wasn't just uncomfortable. It felt like a quiet insult to a life spent in service. But just as he leaned back trying to make peace with the situation, something stirred in his memory. His granddaughter, Captain Sarah Wallace, had insisted on one small detail when booking his ticket. Grandpa, she'd said firmly, Trans Global Airlines has a special line for veterans and Medal of Honor recipients. It's not the usual customer service maze. If there's a problem, any problem, you call this number. She'd written it on a card and tucked it into his wallet. At the time, Jim had smiled and nodded, not expecting to need it. Now sitting alone and weary, he pulled out his wallet and found the card. He stared at the number for a moment, then made the call. It rang once, then twice, and on the third ring, to his surprise, a calm human voice answered. Not a recording, not a menu, not a robot. Trans Global Heroes Liaison, this is David speaking. How may I assist you today? Jim explained everything in a clear, composed tone, the confirmed first-class seat to Washington, the Medal of Honor flag on his record, the reassignment to economy, and the indifference at the gate. David didn't interrupt. He didn't redirect or stall. He simply listened, typing quietly in the background. When Jim finished, David responded with something Jim hadn't heard all day. Colonel Wallace, he said, please accept my sincerest apologies. This should not have happened. Your seating downgrade contradicts every protocol we have in place for distinguished veterans, especially those traveling to official events. I will escalate this immediately. Please remain at gate C12. Someone will be with you shortly. Jim thanked him, hung up, and sat back with a sigh. It sounded promising, but in his experience, promises from large companies often meant nothing. He tried not to get his hopes up. But just 8 minutes later, the atmosphere at the gate changed dramatically. A sudden flurry of movement caught the attention of everyone nearby. A small group of people in business attire, led by a man clearly out of place in the terminal, moved swiftly through the crowd. His face was flushed, his pace urgent. That man was Edward Sterling, President and CEO of Trans Global Airlines. Without hesitation, he rushed directly to gate C12, ignoring the security line, ignoring the agents, ignoring the stares. Where is he? Sterling demanded. Where is Colonel Jim Wallace? When Jim looked up, he found the airline's highest-ranking executive standing in front of him. Sterling extended his hand, then bowed his head slightly. Colonel Wallace, he said, his voice heavy with sincerity, I am deeply sorry for how you were treated. I came here personally to make it right. Jim was stunned. It had taken just one call. Not shouting, not a social media outrage, just a quiet voice speaking to the right ear. It was a reminder that sometimes all it takes is one person on the inside to care enough to act. And when that happens, even the coldest policy can melt under the weight of human decency. When Colonel Jim Wallace looked up from his seat near gate C12, he didn't expect to see the president of the airline rushing toward him. But there stood Edward Sterling, President and CEO of Trans Global Airlines, his shirt collar slightly askew, his brow damp with sweat, and his eyes wide with concern. Surrounded by senior vice presidents and aides, Sterling didn't hesitate. He approached Jim directly, lowered his voice, and extended his hand. Colonel Wallace, sir, he said with genuine urgency, I am Edward Sterling. I came here personally to offer you my deepest apologies. What happened to you today is unacceptable. There is no excuse. None. Jim, still holding the economy boarding pass for seat 32B, gave a slow nod. The moment felt surreal. He had prepared himself for an uncomfortable flight and a quiet disappointment, not a visit from the company's top executive. The surrounding passengers had gone quiet, sensing something important was happening. Sterling gestured toward the gate podium. The seat reassignment you were given, he continued, violated every value we claim to uphold. Your service, your honor, your journey, none of it was taken into account. That is our failure, and I take full responsibility. Behind him, the two gate agents, Brenda and Mark, stood stiffly. Brenda's face was pale, her usual professional veneer cracking under the weight of the moment. Mark looked mortified. We were notified through our Heroes Liaison desk just minutes ago, Sterling explained. As soon as I heard your name and read the report, I dropped everything. This kind of treatment, especially of a Medal of Honor recipient, is not who we are. I promise you, Colonel, this will be corrected. He turned to his executive team. Hold Flight 714. Do not let it leave without Colonel Wallace properly accommodated. The Vice President of Operations gave a quick nod and began coordinating with the station manager. The VP of Customer Experience approached the gate agents, who now looked like they wanted to disappear. Ensure Colonel Wallace's return to first class, Sterling added firmly. I don't care who we need to move. If I have to give up my own seat, so be it. Then he looked back at Jim, his voice softening. Not only will you fly first class today, but from this moment on, Colonel Wallace, all future travel for you and your granddaughter with Trans Global will be complimentary at the highest service level we offer. That's the very least we can do. Jim, ever composed, offered a faint smile. I appreciate that, Mr. Sterling, he said. But this wasn't about a fancy seat. It was about something much simpler: respect. Sterling nodded solemnly. And that is where we failed you most. Within minutes, a first-class seat 1A was ready. Another passenger, recognizing the situation, volunteered to move without hesitation. Jim was escorted on board not by an agent, but by Sterling himself. The crew greeted him with quiet reverence. For the rest of the flight, he was treated not just as a passenger, but as the hero he was. That day, the airline didn't just fix a seating mistake, it restored something far more important. It reminded everyone watching that no matter how large a corporation becomes, it still answers to a higher standard: human decency. The events at Gate C-12 didn't end when Colonel Jim Wallace boarded the plane. In fact, they sparked something far more lasting than an upgraded seat or a heartfelt apology. What happened that day became a defining moment inside Trans Global Airlines, one that would soon ripple through the entire aviation industry. Within days, executives at the airline began drafting a new policy, one that would ensure no veteran, especially not a Medal of Honor recipient, would ever again be reduced to a boarding pass and a seat number. They called it the Callahan Protocol, a nod to the name that would come to symbolize how quickly a system can fail and how swiftly it must rise to correct itself. The protocol established a clear, non-negotiable rule: any service-related passenger flagged in the system, particularly those with high military honors, must be given top seating priority, regardless of fare class, frequent flyer status, or booking method. But more importantly, it required immediate human intervention. No more policy recitations, no more hiding behind screens. If a service-related issue arises, a dedicated team must be called and a real person must step in to make it right. Every gate agent received a memo outlining the change. And soon after, every Trans Global employee at every level was trained in the new standards. Brenda, the gate agent, who had dismissed Jim's situation with cold professionalism, was reassigned to a non-customer-facing role. Her supervisor received mandatory retraining, while Mark, the younger agent who had shown concern but felt powerless, was commended for later reporting the incident internally. He was transferred to the airline's Heroes Liaison Desk, where his empathy could finally be used for good. The company didn't try to bury the mistake. In fact, they leaned into it, recognizing that owning their failure was part of rebuilding trust. News of the incident spread quickly through veterans' networks and social media, not as a scandal, but as a story of redemption. While some criticized the airline's original mistake, many praised how they responded once the issue came to light. More importantly, veterans across the country began to realize they had a voice and someone was finally listening. For Colonel Wallace, however, it was never about attention. He arrived in Washington, D.C. quietly, just as he intended. He attended the White House ceremony with his granddaughter, Sarah, at his side, standing tall in his uniform, as he had so many times before. He never mentioned the airport ordeal during the visit. But Sarah, who had heard whispers through her military channels, asked him later, "Grandpa, did something happen with your flight?" He smiled gently and said, "Just a little turbulence at the gate, sweetheart. Nothing a few good people couldn't fix." That's how Jim saw it, not as a fight, but as a moment that called for decency, and thankfully someone answered. His quiet dignity, his patience, and the strength not to lash out but to act with grace turned a corporate misstep into a blueprint for doing better. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that true honor doesn't demand attention. It simply deserves respect. In today's fast-moving world of loyalty points, status tiers, and automated systems, it's easy to forget the quiet heroes among us men, like Colonel Jim Wallace. He didn't seek recognition. He wasn't loud or demanding. He simply expected the seat he had booked to attend a White House ceremony honoring Medal of Honor recipients. But when that was taken from him without thought or care, it wasn't the loss of comfort that stung, it was the loss of respect. Yet even in that moment of quiet pain, Jim didn't raise his voice. He held his dignity, called the number his granddaughter gave him, and trusted that someone would do the right thing. and they did. The lesson here is simple but powerful. True respect is not given by status. It's shown through action. It's not about first-class seats or VIP access. It's about recognizing those who've sacrificed more than most of us could ever imagine. It's about remembering that every decision, even by a gate agent or corporate office, reflects what we value most as a society. So if this story moved you, if you believe every veteran deserves more than just thanks but real honor, leave a comment below with the word respect. Share your thoughts, share your gratitude, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories that remind us what it means to serve, to stand tall, and to honor those who came before us. Because respect isn't a perk, it's a promise.